Welcome to another episode of Erik Wait Whiskey Studies, and in this video, going to do a review of the Tamdhu 12-year-old single malt Scotch whiskey. But before I get into this, I'm going to tell you about the profile of Tamdhu Distillery and this whiskey. Tamdhu Distillery is located in the village of Knockandhu in Banffshire, Scotland. The name Tamdhu comes from a Gaelic word which means little dark hill. Tamdhu Distillery was founded in 1896 by a group of assemblers wishing to engage in the production of their own whiskey. The first malt whiskey was distilled in 1897. The current owner of Tamdhu Distillery is Ian MacLeod Distillers. The water source is Tamdhu Spring. They derive their malt from Crisp and Simpson's. They use a Porteous mill for grinding their malt. They use a semi-lauter mash tun. Nine wood washbacks. 6 stills, that's 3 onion-shaped wash stills and 3 spirit stills. And a shell and tube condenser. And the spirit is aged in both dunnage and rack warehouses. The Tamdhu 12-year-old Speyside single malt Scotch whiskey is matured 100% in Oloroso sherry cask, bottled at 43% alcohol by volume, and sells for about $70 in my neighborhood. So my first experience with Tamdhu Distillery was the Tamdhu cask strength batch number 5, which I did a head-to-head with the Glenfarclas 105. Really like that whiskey. So I thought, I should get something, another bottle from Tamdhu Distillery. And the 12-year-old sherry cask whiskeys, in terms of a category of Scotch whiskeys, is probably one of the most competitive. If you look at Highland Speyside distilleries, how many of them have 12-year-old sherry cask? There are probably more 12-year-old sherry casks than any other category. If you disagree with me, if you think there's some other profile that's more common, let me know. And then if you look at the ABV levels, anywhere between 40 and 46% alcohol by volume. So if you were to do a head-to-head between all the Highland or Speyside 12-year-old sherry cask whiskeys, there's a lot of them. The consequence is, in a blind taste test, it can be very challenging to figure out what the distillery is. Be able to get the sherry cask, be able to figure out the ABV, be able to figure out, alcohol level and figure out the age. But in terms of being able to identify the particular distillery, there's so many of them out there. So this is a really tough category. But I think they're really putting themselves out there to be competitive and show that they have more than just a pretty bottle. I think Tamdhu Distillery could be the distillery to keep an eye out for. So, what am I getting on the nose? Getting dates and figs, honey, dried oranges, vanilla, light caramel, ginger, cinnamon, baking spices, Christmas cake, panettone roll, and all these descriptors sound like 99% of the sherry cask whiskeys that are out there. On the palate, starts off sweet, about halfway to 3/4 of the way back, I get a distinctive character of almonds. That's not a note that I get a lot in sherry cask. Perhaps because the dried black fruit notes tend to cover up that note, but right towards the back I get a dryness and an almond character. That comes from the oxidative character of Oloroso sherry. So Fino is a biological aging of the Palomino grape in a Solera. Then you get into Amontillado, and then you get to Oloroso. When you get into Oloroso, you're going over into oxidative aging. The floor, that film on top of the wine, is no longer there. So with Fino sherry, there's a floor, a film of yeast that puts a protective layer on the wine. So you tend to get more fresh character from a Fino than you do from an Oloroso. And also Oloroso, the Fino is gone, the floor is gone, and you're getting a darker, nuttier character. And that's really showing up here in this whiskey. It's a little thin. The transitions are not major. The main thing that's showing up differently on the finish, mid-roll, mid-palate and into the finish is that slight nutty character. But it has a medium to medium plus length finish. Good, classic sherry cask. In fact, that's the way I described the cask strength, is that it is a classic sherry cask, a classic sherry cask. This sells for about 70 bucks, give or take. This has a profile to another whiskey that is probably more popular, probably sells more. In fact, it's probably like the 4th largest selling single malt in the United States. And so I want to do a head-to-head with this whiskey and that whiskey to see which one I prefer. So drink a little bit of water. And that other whiskey that's on my mind in comparison to the Tamdhu is the Macallan 12-year-old double cask. Profile-wise, these are very similar. Both 12 years old, both sherry casks, both 43% alcohol by volume, and price-wise in the same neighborhood. Now, prices, of course, always vary. If you're in a controlled state like Ohio or perhaps Virginia, the prices will be different. Or if you're up in Canada, where they seem to get really raked over the coals when it comes to prices. But here in California, in my neighborhood, in this Northern California area, these are equivalent in the price. So it's a really good head-to-head comparison. So let's get to it. Color-wise, they're very, very, very similar. That golden, orange, copper character, pretty much the same. Both of these are natural color. The Tamdhu is slightly more intense. It's more expressive on the nose, and that's funny because I've actually got more whiskey in this Tamdhu glass than I do have here in the Macallan. But there's a lot of similarities. Sultanas are golden raisins, that dried orange character, cinnamon, perhaps a little bit of nutmeg, ginger, a hint of a floral note, a decent amount of vanilla. I would say the Tamdhu is slightly more spice, has a little bit more spice. It has a little bit more of the dried black fruit notes. The Macallan might be more on the golden raisin character. It's funny, now the Macallan's starting to be more expressive. I'm going to put just a touch of a bit more Tamdhu in here. Very, 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 very similar. Very similar. The differences are minute, and the differences can be how long have these two bottles been open? This Macallan 12-year-old has been open longer than the Tamdhu 12-year-old. That can make a difference. How long has it been sitting in the glass? That can make a difference. I just recorded my video of the Tamdhu and the Macallan. I had the Macallan a little bit earlier during the day than I did the Tamdhu. That can affect your perception. But that being said, they're both very, very, very similar. On the palate, you have to take into account the subjective factors that can contribute to your perception of something, which could be everything from your body temperature to the weather, your mood, what have you been recently drinking, what your personal preferences are, and so on and so forth. There's no such thing as a completely objective perception of a whiskey. even drinking water in between, you kind of have to let the water completely finish, because even water can leave something behind that you're now topping a little bit of whiskey on top of whatever residual water could be in your palate. So the good thing to do is drink some water and then talk to let your mouth return to normal. I was doing some blind tasting off camera. I had taken a hot shower, got dressed, came down here, had 8 whiskeys lined up for blind tasting. My nose was completely nose blind. I had a real hard time smelling any of the whiskeys, and it was driving me bonkers as what the hell was going on. The peated whiskeys in the lineup I could perceive, but the rest of them, I was going nose blind. I was trying to figure out what the hell was it? Why was I having difficulty with all these whiskeys? And then I figured there's a possibility, taking a really hot shower just before doing a blind tasting, that there could be some constriction of blood vessels in my nose and maybe even a closing of my sinuses, so that, or just somehow my sinuses were affected by a lot of hot water. So it would have been better off if I had waited a few hours till my body temperature was normal and so forth. But it could be a real hot shower could affect your perception. Now, what do I think between these two whiskeys? On the nose, they're very, very, very similar. On the palate, they're very, very, very similar. The Tamdhu has a slight advantage. It has a little bit more of the dried black fruit notes, which I prefer, over perhaps more orange character with the Macallan. The Macallan does have some of that nice spice character, particularly ginger on the finish. These are very, very, very similar. They're in the same ballpark. I'm going to give the Tamdhu a slight edge. Like, we're talking 1 point. I know the point scores are somewhat relative and are perhaps totally irrelevant, but you get the point. I think that the Tamdhu is slightly better. If these are the same price range in your neighborhood and you're trying to figure out which do I want the Macallan 12-year-old or the Tamdhu 12-year-old, and they're about the same price, then just pick one. Just pick, either one is going to be just as good. If you're looking to buy a gift, I think the presentation of the Tamdhu is prettier than the Macallan. I really like Tamdhu's bottles. But in terms of the quality of the whiskey, they're basically about the same. So then it really comes down to the price. So, which would I recommend? I would recommend whichever one is less expensive in your neighborhood. All right, that's it for this video. If you subscribe to this channel, I want to thank you very much. If you've not yet subscribed, I would ask that you subscribe, ring the bell to be notified when I go live or post a video. And until next time, sláinte. Hey, don't forget to subscribe and check out these other whiskey videos.